0.7%. In today's consumer banking industry, just 0.7 out of every 100 banking relationships is a new relationship. In order to succeed in this mature market, banks must innovate to find new ways to sustain their existing customers while targeting a new growth market. Good afternoon, judges and sponsors, audience members. My name is Ryan Kim, and I'm joined by my team members, Sita Liu, Kenneth Shi, and Kevin Chang. We're really excited to be here today to share some insights into how Capital One can sustainably build its brand into the future. But before we begin, let's take a look at the critical issues that are facing your company today. Consumers are increasingly demanding multi-channel banking experiences, which means that they not only want to be able to bank at physical locations, but also from the comfort of their homes, online, and on the go. Your acquisition of ING Direct provided you with strong online banking competencies, which means that you can effectively service the gamut of these needs. However, competitors are encroaching on this position, which means that you must innovate in order to sustain existing relationships and acquire new ones. But how? And the answer lies in loyalty. A 2013 bank study found that consumers that reported high levels of satisfaction with their banks, as measured by Net Promoter Score, were 12% more likely to make repeat transactions at their bank and to recommend their banks to friends and family. What this means is that building loyalty has a direct impact on your company's ability to make profits from your consumers. To that end, our goal today is to help you leverage your Capital One national lending products, 360 online division, and retail banking division to most effectively sustain and grow your banking relationships in the U.S. Our analysis focused on three key issues. 1, increasing consumer demand for multi-channel banking. 2, low industry growth. And finally, competitive encroachment on your position. Our recommendations, 361, a retention strategy, and Inspire, an acquisition strategy, will drive the brand loyalty needed to sustain current customers and acquire new customers, ultimately driving incremental dividend payout of 25 cents over the next 5 years. I'd like to introduce Sita, who will be speaking about our first strategy, 361.
Thanks, Ryan. So like Ryan described, Capital One is currently competing in a highly mature with low organic growth market. So what that means is the name of the game becomes all about customer retention. In order to retain its existing customers, Capital One must first focus on strengthening its existing core offerings while also remaining cognizant of changing consumer demands, such as multi-channel banking services. By doing so, Capital One will effectively drive customer satisfaction, loyalty, and ultimately the ability to cross-sell, allowing Capital One to generate more banking relationships and more revenues from the same group of people. So with that in mind, we've identified three of the biggest key drivers when it comes to customer satisfaction and what customers want out of a banking relationship. And the first of which is lower fees. A lot of Capital One's customers, competitors, in order to address lower fees, have begun to slash costs, often in the form of physical locations and labor. But this presents a bit of a catch-22 situation, because although the physical locations of banking across the United States have diminished, demand for these physical locations have remained steady and even increased. So ultimately what this means is a physical location strategy that focuses on cutting locations or getting rid of locations altogether is not the best long-term strategy for driving customer retention and satisfaction. And last but not least, customer satisfaction and customer service are very much intertwined. So what this means is Capital One must be cognizant of just how to best service customers going forward. Although technology has removed the lower end of customer service, rendering services such as checking your balance or depositing a check to be fully automated, the higher end of customer service remains very much in play. And we see that consumers want the human interaction and face-to-face interaction when it comes to issue resolution or more complex financial and mortgage questions. So with this in mind, we've identified our core low-cost physical expansion strategy that we like to call 361, a hub-and-spoke model that leverages the best parts of Capital One 360 with the best parts of traditional Capital One, and we're to create a comprehensive expansion model that will cost a fraction of what a traditional expansion model will look like. So the first step in 361 is something we like to call targeting, which is leveraging your existing IBS competencies and geodemographic data in order to identify regions or hubs with most potential and lucrative outcomes. As a result, we then be able to move into a two-part build process after identifying these regions. The first of which is establishing a flagship branch as more of a headquarters or a hub for these regions. These branches will look very much like your traditional Capital One branches and offer the full range of services and products that you currently offer. To augment these hubs, we want to establish a series of spokes, taking the form of traditional Capital One 360 cafes as a low-cost way of addressing regions with lower demographic population, but no less importance. These cafes we envision to be more of a light service or half-service model, being able to address certain customer needs, but not the full range of services that the hub addresses. And to bring it all together is the last step that we like to call integrate, which is connecting these hub and spokes, these full-service branches with these cafes, to provide a holistic experience for the customers. By doing so, we want to cross-train the employees at the cafes and make them more than just brand representatives and have them be able to answer certain levels of financial questions and concerns that any customer might have. For the questions that these hubs, that these spokes cannot answer, we want them to be able to redirect these questions to the full-service hub through a variety of channels such as video conferencing, an appointment system, or self-service kiosks, effectively allowing Capital One to address every single potential customer need, no matter where they're physically located. So what are the overall impacts of a strategy like 361? So we see first and foremost, the hub and spoke system allows Capital One to leverage the acquisition of IMG Direct of all its assets, not just the physical cafe locations, but also the know-how and the knowledge of how to establish a low-cost cafe to best serve its needs. And once these physical locations are established, we can see that the ubiquity directly addresses a lot of customer concerns and demands that they're expecting out of their bank going forward, effectively creating a long-term strategy. And lastly, this physical location strategy also helps Capital One 360, because we see that in the past, a lot of Capital One 360 customers were a little bit hesitant to join the direct banking model. They weren't quite sure about whether they be small business owners or individual consumers, whether or not this completely asset gone or without the physical presence is really a model that they can trust. So with this low-cost expansion, we give them that brand, that trust, that face of Capital One, and allow them to effectively be able to trust both sides of the Capital One business. So with that said, I'd like to introduce Ken, who's going to talk a little bit about the next side of the puzzle. The other piece of the puzzle, our customer acquisition strategy, Inspire. Ken?
Thanks, Tita. So when it comes to customer acquisition, it's all about getting the right product, the right person, at the right price. According to a Bain study, the two most important factors that drive customers toward a particular bank are one, offering a wide product portfolio that can address all customer needs, and two, offering incentives that are more superior than those of its competitors. So who exactly are the customers that you want to target? Well, if you look at it, the majority of all new banking relationships come from switchers. Those that currently have a bank and are currently dissatisfied with it are looking for a new one. And amongst these switchers, the largest demographic that makes up this segment comes from the rising mass affluent, which on average are about 31.5 years old, have 1.2 children, and are highly educated and have high discretionary income. And in fact, they make up 13 million households in the US and account for 60 to 70 profits of all banks. So the question becomes, how can Capital One align its products and incentives in order to target this demographic? And the answer is to develop a new product that directly aligns with their core values, which consists of family and also financial planning. We believe the best way to do this is by introducing new credit cards. But why credit card? So with credit cards, we understand that they're highly marketable. And what we mean by that is that it's easy to advertise with incentives. And Capital One has demonstrated strong success in the past by using commercials to advertise these services. And we believe Capital One can continue to do so. Second, credit cards are easily alignable. Unlike home mortgages and auto loans, which can only really play around with the interest rates and the time frame, credit card incentives can be tailored to the individual to meet their specific needs. And third, credit cards are a gateway. Because they have low commitment and are easily adoptable, it's easy for Capital One to get people into the network and open up opportunities for cross-selling in the future. Our vision for Capital One's credit card is the Capital One Inspire, which will not only help acquire new customers, but also bolster the Capital One brand with an emphasis on family and community. What does an Inspire actually do, though? Well, let's take Ryan, for example, a new Inspire cardholder. Every time he swipes his Inspire card, 1.5% of total purchases will be routed back to a Capital One add-on certificate deposit account that can be used for his child's future. And Inspire is all about family, but we believe this goes beyond just immediate family. As a result, if his brother, sister, or close family friend wants to help contribute to his son's savings, well, they can get that one Inspire card and allocate a portion of their rewards towards his son's savings. And looking even farther down the line, at some point, Ryan's son is going to need to assume financial responsibility. How convenient is it that he already has a Capital One savings account? Yet another opportunity to cross-sell. It's great that Capital One can strengthen this idea of family ties within the network, but it's even better that Capital One can expand its customer base while doing so. And lastly, because we really want to hammer down this idea of community and family. As a result, we want to invite Ryan to these Capital One sponsored community events where he can not only meet other Inspire cardholders, but also socialize with local Capital One employees. And through having a sustained relationship, we believe that can have deeper relationships and move Capital One as a brand farther away from one based on transactions and toward a brand based on relationships and community. And in addition, at these community events, Brian can enjoy Capital One sponsored activities such as a movie night or financial planning workshops. Ultimately, the purpose of these events is to demonstrate Capital One's commitment and investment into the family and the network. And by introducing Inspire and the Inspire cardholder network, not only can Capital One's attract this new customer segment, but ultimately develop channels for organic marketing and strengthen the Capital One brand loyalty. So now that we know how to attain and retain customers, Kevin's going to talk about how all this actually impacts Capital One.
Thanks, Kenneth. So now that Sita and Kenneth have walked us through our recommendation for customer retention and acquisition, as a team, we would like to quantify the impact of our strategy. In terms of brand loyalty, our strategy directly addresses the key drivers behind customer satisfaction, which will increase customer loyalty measured through Net Promoter Score. As Ryan elaborated on previously, a 1 or 2 point increase in NPS will increase the likelihood of a customer making a repeat transaction with your bank, Capital One, by 12%. In terms of financials, the 361 hub and spoke physical location expansion strategy will decrease your capital expenditures by 30% on a forward store-by-store basis. In addition, the Capital One Inspire card, along with the increased brand loyalty that I spoke to earlier, will result in stable revenue growth of 15 to 20% over the next 5 years. Together, the financial impact, along with the brand impact of our two recommendations, will drive dividend payouts, an incremental dividend payout of 25 cents over the next 5 years. At this point in the presentation, we'd like to open up the floor for any of your questions.
I thought your presentation had a very nice balance to it, but I guess one glaring question I had was, you guys talk about having cafes with light services. Number one, I don't understand what that means. And I think secondly, I think one of the reasons a lot of banks don't have branches everywhere is there's certain regulatory issues you have services in general. So from a regulatory perspective, I'm not sure if you can actually even have just light services.
Okay. Go to additional content, service under 361 expansion model, service offerings, which is
Sure, so here we have an example breakdown of how potentially we can leverage the cafes to be more of a light service model. As you can see, we want these cafes to be primarily focused on servicing the customer. So a lot of the banking regulations have to do with the transfer of funds and how a physical location can do so with that. But we wanted these spokes to address customer service issues. Any problems they might have or questions they might have about their mortgages, issue resolutions, as well as more basic financial services. And hopefully that will avoid any regulatory problems going forward.
I had a question about your total consumer pool now, combination Capital One consumers, ING consumers. What does your research show on the percentage of that now total pool that's mass affluent, which is your target for the Inspire program, and what you're going to do to target the rest of that consumer base?
Sorry, could you, what do you mean the rest of
the segment that's not mass affluent.
Oh, okay.
The existing Cap One and ING base of consumers.
Okay, so we recognize that because the majority of these consumers that have not been targeted yet are mass affluent, that definitely wants to be the focus. However, we understand that these ideas of family and financial planning are not exclusive to the group, so we believe this will help Capital One attract new members as well. And on top of that, we also want to introduce this idea where if you can get your kid into the program early, it'll at some point he'll be introduced to the Capital One network on his own, and this will once again introduce the idea of cross-selling and building people within the Capital One network.
So just to quickly add on, the Inspire program's focus is on organic marketing. So while we are targeting a specific demographic of rising mass affluence, we recognize our networks span a lot more than just simply people in our demographic. So over time, through word of mouth, through family connections, through these community events, the full circle demographic and all the people that we've outlined in the chart will potentially become customers of Inspire and Capital One.
Yeah, I'd like to add on as well. So our acquisition strategy, as Steve and Kenneth were talking about, is really focused on the rising mass affluent. Our retention strategy is what's going to retain that current customer base and make sure that they don't switch to other things.
I think just building on that last question, how do you think about, like, beyond actually building a new credit card product, what you could do with the existing consumer base that Capital One has to actually drive banking relationships?
Can you go to carry additional content pushing full drivers?
Sure, so we see here a series of push and pull factors outlined as why people switch banks and why people choose their banks. So from here, we get a really good picture of what focuses what service lines and potential recommendations and fixes we can have in order to retain customers, as well as serve customers beyond offerings such as a credit card. We see the breakdown here that a lot of people leave because of poor service, lack of branches, and high fees, which is why our retention strategy really tries to drive these factors. And on the other side, we see that having great products like the Inspire card, as well as high quality incentives and interest rates that they care about, pulls people to us. And effectively creating a very holistic customer base, not just limited to any one particular demographic.
So the economics behind this, you boiled down to being able to increase the dividend by 25 cents. Can you talk a little bit about why you're talking about it in terms of the dividend, which sometimes would be paid out if you don't have better ways to be able to provide shareholder value versus some of the other terms you could have used?
Okay, you can go to additional content, financials, DPS with recommendations.
Oh, with recommendations.
With recommendations.
That logo in the corner?
That's the logo. No, put this one. No, you got it.
Sure. So the reason why we measure our impact through dividends per share is because traditionally in a lot of companies you measure your shareholder value through free cash flow if you're looking at it intrinsically. But with a bank, your free cash flow might not necessarily affect the shareholders as much because ultimately the metric across the industry is dividends per share. We felt that this best represented the positive impact of our recommendations, both from a financial standpoint and brand loyalty standpoint.
I have a question about the cost structure behind the hub-and-spoke model. I know you guys said that you want to push this hub-and-spoke model. I was wondering, is that only in places we already have physical locations, or is this a nationwide push? And if it is a nationwide push, which was my understanding of the presentation, how is that going to reduce capital expenditures by 30%?
Okay, sure. Additional content, financials, cost structure, traditional versus hub-and-spoke.
Sure. So it is based on your understanding. You are correct. It is a national expansion strategy, as well as what Capital One pre-existing has with its retail branches. The reason why we say that's a reduction in capital expenditures is because traditionally, in a traditional retail expansion model, we'd have to build out different retail branches that are 4,000 square feet, and this is from an investment memorandum with a Capital One retail branch. And ultimately, the main driver behind the cost of expanding are real estate. So if you were to expand with a traditional retail model of a 4,000 square feet, flagship branch, that would result in about $5 million. And because the spoke cafes are smaller square footage, you can put them in a mall, potentially next to a Kroger grocery store, and occupy a small amount of space, we really identified some cost-saving potential in that space. And in addition, because the square footage is so much reduced, you can build out multiple spokes and still be able to reduce the costs compared to a traditional retail expansion model.
So if I'm correct, I understand it correctly, it's 30% less than what it would be if you did traditional, but for Capital One over the next couple of years, this is going to be a very, very large capital expenditure to build this.
Correct, but I think the crux of the argument is that we really identified a need for physical expansion because customers today still desire that sort of physical interaction. So going forward, if Capital One were to address that need, it would need to expand, and we recommend expanding through a hub and spoke model rather than traditional.
And in addition, in order to mitigate the cost of it, you can leverage your current IBS system to find out which locations are most beneficial for Capital One. So it's choosing locations that are very low risk for your company. Should I wrap up? Can you return to the appendix, please? Thank you.
Thank you all so much for your questions. We'd now like to address the feasibility of our recommendation by showcasing a 5-year implementation timeline. The first step in our 361 physical location strategy will be to leverage your core competency of IBS and analyze geodemographic data over a 1-year period. Once a target trade area has been identified, Capital One can then build a hub branch in that specific location, followed on by the construction of spoke cafes. If a hub retail branch already exists due to Capital One's pre-existing retail banking presence, then spoke can be built out immediately. On the other hand, the Capital One Inspire card can be rolled out immediately due to the fact that there's minimal work to be completed necessary on the back end. However, we do recommend that Capital One hold community launch events that coincide with the release of the card to further this sense of brand loyalty and sense of family. In the past, Capital One was able to succeed because it understood its customers and their product needs at the right time and the right place. Our strategy today builds upon those same core principles that provided the company so much success in the past. By implementing our hub and spoke physical location strategy, and along with the introduction of a new Capital One inspired credit card, your company can further your customers' loyalty to the Capital One brand. Because ultimately, brand loyalty will drive Capital One step closer to number one. Thank you all so much for your time.